All right, now in this part of the course, we are going to take that file that we downloaded in the last video, get it into a working directory, and we are going to open it up as a new project inside of IntelliJ. Now, it's okay if you're using a different IDE. I use IntelliJ. I think it's the best IDE out there. That's what all the pros use, but you can get by without a different IDE. And we'll show you how to open up and initialize that project inside of IntelliJ. And then we're going to use Maven at the end of this video to start up that application inside of Tomcat. We'll show you how easy that is to use Maven to bring that up, and that is completely IDE agnostic. Okay, I've taken that zip file that came down from the Spring Initializer, and I moved it over to a working directory. And I typically will work out of my home directory, source, and then right now I'm doing Spring Framework Guru stuff, so I'm in Framework Guru and in a folder called Spring 5 where I've taken the zip file and expanded it out. I just want to show you the structure here. So we do have this Maven W. That is a wrapper to execute Maven. So this is a real handy tool. So we don't need to have Maven installed on the system, but ideally you should have Maven installed, but you can use the Maven wrapper to run a number of the commands without having Maven installed. Now, it does give us the standard Maven directory structure, which gives us source main Java, resources. We can see that we get an application property stub in there. And this is just a standard Java project that is created for us. So we're going to get an application.properties. We'll get one class created. So we see here the Spring 5 web application.java. That is a Spring Boot application. So what I'm going to do now is let's go over to IntelliJ and open up this project in IntelliJ, and we'll inspect a little bit more what the Spring Initializer gave us. So I'm going to come into IntelliJ. I'm going to go to File and say New Project from existing sources. So this is important to take from existing sources. If you just do New Project, it'll try to just generate a new project for you, which is not what we want. We want to look at that Maven. So I'm going to come back up here to Source, Spring Framework Guru, Spring 5. There's that application. There's the Maven POM. That's the directory that we want to be in. So we're going to go ahead and do an open here. And it's asking us, and we are going to say Maven. Say Next. And I don't think we need to do anything. I'm going to go ahead and let it import Maven projects automatically. And I don't think we need to change any other settings there, so I'm going to let that go through all the defaults. You probably don't have that profile. That is something that I use for publishing artifacts up to the Maven repository, so don't worry about that if you do not have that. And it came up with a default version, so we are going to allow that to go. Wants the SDK, so I'm taking the latest 1.8 of Java. And finally, name. Just double check that it looks like the path is correct, and I am going to say finish. And now IntelliJ is going to go ahead and open that up. Now, if you're using a different IDE, everything that I do is IDE agnostic, so I definitely don't check in any IDE files. That's a huge no-no, so if you do that, don't. That's bad. People won't like you if you do that. And so if you're using something like Eclipse or NetBeans or something like that, you should be okay. The free version of IntelliJ is quite good, but it does not have some of the advanced Spring Framework features. So as I work through that, like I can create a project in Spring Initializer directly from IntelliJ. I don't have to go out to the start.io website. So that is a nice feature. And then IntelliJ's advanced features also detect the Spring Framework context quite nicely as well. So it does a really good job with that and determining a lot of the advanced configuration options of Spring and catching errors that you do make. So, but this is going to be a very simple project for IntelliJ. You can see in the background, IntelliJ has been going out and indexing it, probably downloaded some Maven dependencies along the way. And we can see that there's a couple hidden folders there, .idea and .maven. That's stuff that we are not going to have to mess with. We do get a default get ignore from the initializer. Not bad. I am going to improve upon this. I have a standard get ignore that I think is much more complete than this. Now, let's take a look at the Maven POM. This is where a lot of the important stuff is at. So I'm going to resize this a little bit. So if you're familiar with Maven, we have a lot of the standard boilerplate stuff here. And now we're getting into the parent, and we are using a Spring Boot starter parent. Now this is very, very important. This is one of the really powerful parts of Spring Boot is that it has this concept of parent POMs, and what this is giving us is a set of curated dependencies. So when the Spring guys do a release, they know the dependencies of all the dozens of jars that are involved in this, and they do what's called a curated release. So we are inheriting all that version information from them. And now we've added, looks like about 3-4 starters here. And this is all stuff that we selected as we're going down that list, picking out different stuff that we want to include in the project. So the first one is a Spring Boot starter actuator. So that is going to bring in dependencies for Spring Boot actuator. And then we also did Spring Boot starter JPA. And this gives us a lot right out of the box, because if you notice, we're not including Hibernate, but Hibernate is going to be a child dependency of the starter data JPA there on line 34. Now, same with Timeleaf. We didn't ask for Tomcat, but Tomcat's going to get brought in because we did the starter web, and Timeleaf will get automatically configured by Spring Boot. So there's a lot happening in the background that we're not seeing for us. Line 45 there, we called for an H2 database, and now Spring Boot is going to see that we have that database on our class path, and it's going to automatically configure that database for us. So to give you a little bit of insight as to the dependencies, if I come over here and just look at the dependency tree, so the Spring Data JPA is a good example. We can see that we're getting AOP, JDBC, Hibernate, logging, so you can see how some of these things will cascade, and we're getting a very complete set of jars and libraries for us, and that is all coming from the Spring Boot parent POM. So between having the parent POM and the auto configuration capabilities of Spring Boot, we are seeing a huge, huge, huge time saver here, and just how quickly we can spool up a simple web application. All right, so what I'd like to do now is show you how to run this. And this is actually pretty easy to do. I'm going to come down here to Terminal. And in IntelliJ, this gives me a terminal prompt right in the directory of where I'm working at. So if I do a pwd there, you can see that it's my source directory. And what I want to do is that /nvnw, and we'll do a spring-boot : run. Okay, so I'm using that Maven wrapper, and that's a little shell file inside of there that has Maven cooked in. And we are going to do a Spring Boot, which is a Maven goal, and we're going to give it the run attribute. So I'm going to hit enter now, and we're going to see it's going to go out, build the project, check out all the dependencies, and we can see that Spring Boot has started up, going through its mappings, and we can see right down there on the bottom that it is now running on port 8080. So because I brought in the starter web, it did bring in an embedded Tomcat instance. So now I have Tomcat listening on port 8080, but unfortunately there's nothing there. If I go over there, we'll just get an error page at this point. We need to do some further work in configuration, but I want you to see how easy it was to start this up. And I did this completely outside of IntelliJ, other than using the terminal window. So any application, you should be able to run it this way. I think Windows might be a little bit different, but in a POSIX-based operating system, you should be good to go here. And don't worry about the IDE that I'm using here. Hopefully you're using IntelliJ, but in this case, I did not use IntelliJ. So if you ever run into problems, if you're concerned about something weird is happening, check to see if Maven runs. That's a very important tip. So sometimes the IDEs do weird stuff, especially Eclipse. It does very strange things. But go in and see if your project will run from the command line using Maven. So that's really kind of the reference standard. Make sure that you're not chasing some weirdness with the IDE. Okay, now we have a working Spring application. Now it's just a stub of an application, but you saw in just a few steps we were able to get a brand new Spring Boot project, and we now have Tomcat running on our dev machine. So don't have a web page there yet. We don't have any data in there yet. That's what we're going to be doing coming up. But you saw how easy it was to get this pre-configured project to bring up the Tomcat web application server and a Spring context in just a few mouse clicks. So we've really jump-started our development here, and we are ready to go, and we'll start adding data to it in the next video.